Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Meet the Entrepreneurs session of Entrepreneurship 101. My name is Marielle Voxep, and I organize the educational events here at Mars. I'd like to start off with a couple of announcements. Our Upstart competition, which was scheduled for May 23rd, has been moved. We had a few scheduling conflicts, so we've moved it to May 30th, which allows our competitors to spend a little bit more time preparing for their pitches. I'm happy to announce, and this is also news to the competitors who are here tonight, that in addition to the $10,000 prize, this year's winner will be receiving a pitch video production package generously donated by Mars Media. Mars Media are the guys that you see here every week recording our lectures. So this will include 1 hour of studio time with one camera, a teleprompter and camera operator. Gordon's our camera operator tonight. Followed by 3 hours of post-production to create the rough and final cuts, and it comes to a retail value of $4,000. So for those of you that were here for our marketing and communications lecture, you probably saw Mark Evans talk about the importance of having a video in communicating your message to investors. On that note, I just wanted to mention that one of our panelists tonight, Jessica from Eve Medical, is actually one of the winners from last year's Upstart competition. So I'd just like to do a little plug there, and maybe she can mention tonight a little bit about how the competition has helped her since then. So on your way in, you received name stickers with colored circles that indicate which sectors you're in, if you belong in the life sciences and healthcare practice. And if you don't, that's okay too. That's just to help you guys, the groups identify each other during our networking reception following the lecture. And I'm going to invite up Veronika Litinski, our moderator for tonight. She's going to lead a short 5 to 10 minute icebreaker activity for the people that are here in person. And for those of you that are tuning in on the webcast, if you just please be patient and stay tuned. We'll be back in about 5 minutes. So you probably recognize Veronika. Veronika was here a couple of weeks ago. She did our business communication tools lecture. Veronika is an advisor in our life sciences and healthcare practice. She works with a portfolio of life sciences and healthcare entrepreneurs at Mars, and she has a particular focus on financing and corporate development. She has also had an interesting career, from a research scientist to corporate finance, a wide range. She was also instrumental in the launch of Cognicity, the brain fitness company created through a partnership between Mars and Baycrest. Please help me welcome Veronika tonight.
Thank you. And I'd like to invite our panelists on the stage. So today we have Jeff Ruby, CEO and founder of a company called Utopia. Jessica Ching, please, of Eve Medical, and Dr. Stephen Abrams of Quantum Dental. And please sit down. We're going to have an interesting conversation. Let's just start with simple introductions. So please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe your background, and then we'll dive into the companies you started and running right now. Please.
Great. So hi, I'm Jeff Ruby. I'm the founder and CEO of Utopia. And just a bit on my background, I did joint JD MBA degrees here in Toronto, and was actually starting out in a career in corporate securities law, which I was miserable in. And if any of you have gone to law school, you may know why. And at about the time that I was looking to leverage my MBA and move into business, within a week, I got an awful phone call from my father, who at the age of 54 was just diagnosed with cancer. And it was my introduction to our healthcare system, or what I now call our sick care system, and it really motivated me to make some changes there. So this is my 4th startup company in health. I started with a genetic diagnostics company 12 years ago. I moved into cancer screening and prevention. And then prior to starting Utopia, I partnered with the Cleveland Clinic Foundation and Canyon Ranch, and I brought them to Canada in a project called Cleveland Clinic Canada. So actually everything I've been doing is built toward Utopia, which I'll maybe share with you in a moment.
Thank you. Jessica.
So I'm Jessica Ching. My background is actually in industrial design. I studied to become a product designer at OCAD University, and that's where I was actually doing research in non-compliance for cervical cancer screening from a design perspective. And basically, I was just trying to figure out what it is about cervical cancer screening that women were uncomfortable doing or going for, and the limiting factors. And then once I graduated, I had an early prototype for the product that we are now trying to commercialize, and I decided to start Eve Medical. And it's my first company, so I'm a new entrepreneur, which I'm sure many of you are. And last year, I was actually in your position trying to pick up some words of wisdom from these people, which I hope I can share.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Abrams. I'm a dentist practicing now 31 years in a group practice. And this grew out of a challenge that we had diagnostically many years ago about the inability to find tooth decay on the biting surface of a molar tooth. And the story goes that I bitched and complained about this, and lying in my chair one day was a physicist, sees my partner, and I complained to him about it. He said, "I've got the solution for you." I said, "Great." He said, "There's this really cool technology. We use it for imaging defects in crystal structure. Enamel's a crystal." So I said, "Here's the problem. Go ahead and solve it." And I was told two of the world's biggest lies. It won't take any of your time, and it won't cost you any money. So here I am today. We're now on market in Canada and in the EU. We have a device, and each day that I use it, we have a game we play in clinical practice, who's smarter, the canary or me? Ends up the machine actually knows a lot more about what I'm doing than what I use in terms of my tools. It's really elevated my clinical practice and the other practices that are using it now to actually find caries at an early stage, to image and watch that lesion progress, and to actually treat it in a much different way. So along the way, it's been a wonderful process in terms of intellectually stimulating me to learn about tooth decay and then take this knowledge and use it both with this device and use it to actually teach my profession things.
Thank you. And I actually watched this particular technology first when it was searching for application in semiconductor industry. And it was a long journey that didn't go actually very far, although a lot of money had been spent. So for me, it's particularly rewarding to see this very fundamental insights in physics now finding home in healthcare applications. Jeff, you haven't told much about Utopia. Could you elaborate a bit what the company is about?
Sure. So Utopia is really it's a personalized health company that's really addressing the sustainable weight loss, wellness, anti-aging, and disease prevention. And the idea is to really turn the market on its head. Right now, if you look at the way the mass market is served up those services, they're usually fairly silo-based, one size fits all. So you'll look to lose weight or live healthy or manage to prevent disease by nutrition-only solutions or exercise-only solutions or behavior-only solutions. When you look at the top ends of the market, what the best in the world are doing, it's all about integration. It's all about lifestyle management and bringing those components together. So what Utopia is doing is it's leveraging that best-in-practice approach, but using fantastic technology, so cutting-edge mobile platform, real gaming dynamics for behavior change, and social networking to design personalized plans that are also tailored to your genes. So we use personal genetic testing to identify the right plan for each individual, and then provide a custom coaching portal where you can receive a coach who's matched to your personality to help you achieve your goals. So if it's, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to prevent type 2 diabetes, or I want to age well, we've got a completely customized solution for you at the price point or below of what the current market is delivering up. That's what Utopia is about.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So you get the sense of that elevated pitch idea. So maybe Jessica and Steve, you can do yours.
So Eve Medical is an early stage medical device company based here in Toronto. And what we do is we design and develop innovative products for women's health. Right now we're focused on developing a product called HerSwab, which basically allows women to self-collect high-quality samples for sexually transmitted infections testing. And the reason why we want to do that is because about 40% of women in North America and Europe are under-screened for cervical cancer, but also for other diseases like chlamydia and gonorrhea. And that leads to a lot of pretty devastating diseases for the women, but also high healthcare costs for treatment. So that's basically what we're trying to do.
And Steve, you talked quite a bit about the company, but
Well-
let's talk about the business again.
Well, Quantum Dental Technologies has developed the Canary system, and the Canary system is designed to look at tooth decay in an extremely different way. Tooth decay is an infectious disease and it's reversible. And typically the treatment that I as a dentist would do, we'd drill, fill, and bill. Or I would look at something and say, let's watch it. So you look at this and say, if this is a disease, what are we watching? What are we doing watching? What are we waiting for? We're waiting for drill, fill, and bill. So that really didn't make a lot of sense to us. So we found a technology that allows us to image that lesion, to measure that lesion, and then we can start to treat it from its earliest stages to the drill, fill, and bill stage. And at its earliest stages, there are products on the market today that will remineralize early lesions. The problem is you don't know if they're working or they're not. And as a dentist trying to do the right thing for my clinical practice patients, we would get them on the latest toothpaste or the latest varnish. They'd spend the money, and 2 years later, we'd find out it didn't work because the technology we had to detect lesions only found it at its later stages. The Canary system allows us to image that piece of crystal structure, that tooth, and watch that lesion progress or shrink. And so if you use fluoride varnish or Colgate Sensitive Pro or whatever you're using with your dentist, they're able to measure that lesion and tell you whether it's getting better or not. And we built onto that platform a cloud where you can get your lab reports or your Canary reports, where the dentist can see and store their data. And we can do the traditional find the hole, but we can find it in a very different way. And in clinical practice over the last couple of weeks, we have a game we play called Who's Smarter, the Canary or Abrams? And it ends up the Canary is smarter than Abrams, because the Canary can find decay along the edges of fillings that Abrams couldn't find with x-rays and visual exam. And when we open up and remove that filling, we're amazed at how large the area of decay is that we weren't able to diagnose with the traditional tools we have in clinical practice. For our patients, it means we're finding these things at a point where we can treat them. And the stuff that we're finding earlier, we can monitor and treat in a non-invasive fashion. So it's really going to be a sea change in how you treat one of the most common diseases that we deal with in dentistry and that's dealt with in healthcare, which is tooth decay.
I'm sold. So, none of us trained in school to be entrepreneurs. And we obviously all come from very different backgrounds. Jeff, you own your fourth startup, so, there's no excuses. You are the startup kind of guy.
Yeah.
So, what are the additional skills you feel you acquire through your journey of, working as entrepreneur, and what are the skills that you couldn't possibly learn in schools, but you kind of need to develop them in the real life situation, kind of trial by fire doing it?
I'd say the main thing, there's got to be a passion. There's got to be something burning inside you to figure out or fix or to solve. There's got to be something that you're looking for that you can't find in what's existing. And for me, that's exactly what I was looking for. So, as I mentioned, I got this call 12 years ago from my father, who was diagnosed with cancer, sitting in the oncologist's office with him. His first question out of his mouth was, doctor, how did I get this? And the doctor's response came fairly quickly, well, Mr. Ruby, I think a lot of this had to do with your lifestyle. And here was a successful entrepreneur in his own right. He had a great business, a philanthropist, but underlying all that, had no plan for how to eat right, no plan for how to exercise, no plan for how to maintain his behavior and stress and pressure as an entrepreneur. And that was ultimately what the doctor was pointing to as a large cause of his disease. And I'm not sure what scared me more, the fact that here he was sitting there with this diagnosis and this awful journey ahead of him, and he unfortunately passed away 2 years later. But me sitting beside him with no plan myself for how to eat properly, how to exercise, and how to manage my behavior. And so it's one of those classic dilemmas. You're sitting there, you realize you don't know the answer yourself, and then you imagine that most people probably don't know that answer. Where would you get that answer? It's not from your doctor, it's not from Weight Watchers, it's not from the Cosmopolitan magazine. And so there was a hole, and I just did what every good lawyer does, and I wanted to fill that hole. And so I guess that's what makes me a little bit unusual. I didn't get to bill for it. But you have to have a passion. There's got to be something driving you and an answer that hasn't been answered. And that for me has carried me through the 4 startups, and it's just this desire to make something appear that doesn't exist right now.
Jessica, you trained for a glamorous job as a designer, and here you are, running your own company. So.
Yeah. I think I totally agree with the passion comment from Jeff, because when I graduated, I actually never imagined myself becoming an entrepreneur, especially not at this stage of my career, just coming out of school. It just wasn't something that was on the table that I was thinking about. But then when it came time to sort of let go of this thing that I had developed, which I really believed could help a lot of people, it didn't feel right putting that on the shelf either. And so at that point, I felt there was a reasonable business opportunity, but mostly it was something that I really believed in. I felt it was something no one had looked at before, and it was worth giving it a shot. And so that's how I ended up starting this company.
So in those early days when you see the hole and you're not sure if it's worth going after, what do you do? What supports you relied on, and how did you make a decision to make that leap? What was kind of instrumental for you?
For us, it was a sort of a staged process. The prof I was working with, Andreas Mendelis, is a physicist, and he had his funding through the Ontario Centres of Excellence, their materials and manufacturing group. And so that we would put together a research project to look at a particular part of this, and I would put in the in-kind or whatever was needed, and we'd go out for a year. And at the 6-month point, I'd evaluate whether or not we'd actually gotten far enough and whether or not the technology worked. So it was very much a step process to see how we were doing. And I had, fortunately, input into the research group so we could see what they were doing, how they were doing it, and if it could answer the questions for me that I could see down the road as a clinician. Could I take this technology that could image defects in metals and semiconductors and make it possible to image defects in enamel, which stuck in somebody's mouth and had a nerve connected to it? So it was very much a stepped process with very clear goals, so that there weren't a series of leaps. The biggest leap really was the final push in 2006 when OCE asked us to commercialize. Were we ready to do it? And then we decided, yeah, we were. We had a product. We had our R&D done. We knew what it was doing. We could see it perform, and we had a number of papers that validated what we were doing. So we felt comfortable making the leap to the next step.
And so the interesting feature of your company is that effectively you are the user, right?
Yeah.
So you're the customer of the product you're commercializing. So you can see sort of what's needed and what attributes and features are really important. What about you, Jeff? Do you feel the same way?
Well,
How did you make that decision? Not to practice law, I can see that, but there are other options in life.
for sure. And again, I think it came down to just, it was that drive to figure out something that was missing, and being a user as well is important. I was ultimately looking for something that would benefit me and answer the question that I had sitting in that doctor's office: what is that lifestyle plan? What should I be doing? And so actually all that I've been doing over the last 12 years is answering questions that I wanted for myself that I had to imagine other people were looking for as well. But I'd say some of the things that are, there's that instinct to just go for it, and ultimately there is a bit of a diving board and you do take a step over the plank, but I think it's really important to have some wise people or mentors who you can bounce things off and make sure that you're assessing how deep the fall is and whether or not you're going to capture some rungs along the way, as opposed to just going off it on your own. And so for me, in each one of the startups that I've done, there have always been people that I can speak to, mentors, potential users, so you're always bouncing. It's almost like a bit of a sonar exercise. You're just always bouncing ideas off people that you trust to make sure that what you're thinking and how you're iterating makes sense and will be well received.
So people are pretty happy to be that reflection for you, and because you're basically asking them to help validate your business idea. How did you find those people? And
it helps when they're investors.
Okay.
They've got a pretty good stake in it, or people, life partners. I mean, one thing about being an entrepreneur, don't discount the support that you're going to need from the loved ones in your life to do this, because you're dragging them into your adventure whether they like it or not. So having someone in your life to bounce it off of, having investors, mentors, board members, or the good folks at Mars, all are helpful, but going it alone is a tough thing to do.
What was your discipline, Jessica, making a decision that it's worthwhile?
I think talking to people was really, really important for us. Although I'm a woman, so I would be a user myself, but I realized that there are different women out there who have different perspectives. So I think talking to the stakeholders who would be involved in the future, understanding whether they're on board or not, whether this is something they would even use or not, what do doctors think about it, what do researchers think about it. I think we tried our best to go out and talk to anyone who would listen, really, just to get their take and to make sure that if we were to move forward, that there would be people on the other side to help support us. And I think another important thing that we did was we basically set up go, no go sort of scenarios for ourselves. So if we were not able to get the funding by this point, does that mean that we're going to stop this company? Or if we are not able to validate this at this point, it sounds like nobody really wants it, then that has to be a stop point for this company. And we had to be able to plan and really think about it too, and not be. It's really easy to be very idealistic about your startup and to think that everybody's on board, but you really have to listen and make sure that you have your criteria in place. And if all those things don't check off, then you have to seriously consider whether you should be moving forward or not.
So I'm also running a startup. And my challenge is I have 100 things I need to do, and somehow I need to choose what am I going to do on Monday morning and lunchtime and the afternoon. So how do you guys prioritize? How do you choose where to focus your energies, Jeff?
So this is something I was taught by a really wonderful entrepreneur that I've now used throughout all of the operations, and it organizes my day. I keep a very simple document. Now it's a Google document that I share with my entire team, and it's got 3 things on it. It's got mission on the top, it's got sort of strategic goals below it, and then it's got tactical goals. And so mission is 1 line, the strategic goals are 5, no more, and then tactical are 10, no more. And so every day, that document's always open on my screen, and it's usually open on my team's screen as well. And if it's collaborative, it's best, and that's why a Google Doc is great. But it's just pretty simple. At any point, if I'm not sure what to do, it's all ordered and prioritized, and so I just order up. And so any email that I'm reflecting on, any meeting that I accept, it's always against that document and that mission, those strategic goals, and then those tactics that we're working on together.
What is your recipe, Jessica?
I think mine's a little bit more simplistic than that. Well, I basically bucket things, so urgent and very important, urgent, not important, not urgent, very important, not urgent, not important, basically, and just make sure that I balance things out, that all the things that are very urgent, very important, that those are dealt with in a timely way, but you also don't want to ignore the things that are not urgent but very important. So you have to make sure that you balance your week out to hit those buckets.
And Stephen, you have to balance dental practice and running a company. So what is your secret?
Well, our management style is Monday morning starts off with a management team meeting. It's used to be face-to-face, now it's teleconference, an hour, 2 hours, where we set the short-term goals for the week and look at our medium and long-term goals. And that then focuses the management team as to what we need to do. And during the course of the week, I'm usually in touch with various parts of the team and various parts of the company, depending upon what the issues are of the day. And I walk around with a BlackBerry in my clinical practice, so I know pretty much what's happening as we go forward. And the management team knows when to bug me in terms of I've got to make this decision or we've got to move forward on it. But we find that there's just so many things happening that one can never really predict out how a day will unmap or unfold. You may think that you're going to end up having made this decision or finalize this by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then realize that well, this afternoon we just got a response back from FDA, so now we've got to reconfigure where we want to go with FDA and put some other stuff that we need to do on the back burner until tomorrow, or a sales meeting that needs to be done. So your priorities get shifted on an hourly basis. And in addition to my clinical practice, I'm active within my association because of my involvement in understanding caries. I've become the go-to guy in explaining to government how to design programs to deal with tooth decay and other issues. So that also is another facet that impacts upon my life. So it's just a little crazy, but by the end of the week, by the time Friday hits, we've accomplished what we need to. But a lot of the management team will have, basically said, you need to make this decision within the next half hour, and off you go. And our management style is one by consensus, where we need to get everybody on board, agreeing that this is where we're going, and then off is for major stuff, and then off we go.
So in the startup world, as a Mars advisor, companies often come to me and say, we need money. And my answer is often, not yet, you need other things. And sometimes it's building out the team. So what are your thoughts about that equation, money and talent? And in what order would you attack it, and how you address this issue in your business? Jeff?
Most challenging thing, because any startup, if you've ever been involved, will know you can't possibly afford the talent that you need with the dollars that you have. So it's really about finding leverage points. So talent is more important than money, bar none, because you can have all the money in the world, but which, by the way, you will not get or raise without the talent on the back of. So, but the key is it's very difficult to pay market rates. So the talent that you're looking for, you really have to sell that dream. You really have to sell that passion, which is why it comes back to passion again on the part of the entrepreneur. If you don't have it and you can't sell it, then you're never going to bring people along who are going to buy in. And it's got to be a long run thinking as well. Anyone thinking about joining a startup versus a normal run-of-the-mill job, you'd be crazy to do the startup job. I mean, there's no way the payoff is there in the shorter time. It's a longer time perspective, and so things like options and performance pay become really important assets of an entrepreneur in terms of incentivizing the kind of talent you need to attract not only the right other team members to the table, but the right investors to the table, and ultimately the right gel to get your idea off the ground. So talent comes first, but you're never going to be able to attract the talent with money alone. You've got to be far more creative than that.
What about you, Jessica? And I know you really engage in a lot of partnerships. So, on some level, your talent search is also working with other organizations and looking for those strategic partners. How do you approach this?
Well, I agree that talent and money go together in some ways. Sometimes it's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario. Our company is really 2 people at the moment, so we're a very small company. But I do think that money comes in different forms and in different amounts. So, our company has really survived a lot on institutional funding, for example. And without that funding, we wouldn't have been able to achieve some of the things that we've been able to achieve. We wouldn't have been able to build our prototype. We wouldn't have been able to do some initial market validation. And so I think it's important that we had I think that early money is extremely important to building a company. Yeah.
And what about you?
I was going to comment, you're talking about money and talent, and what I've learned along the way is that in order to attract the money, you need to do the educating. And to do the educating means that you've got to start educating somebody that you think will want to work with you now, even though they won't appear on the scene for 4 years. So our tactic was when we looked at our product and it was just a prototype one, which we showed at a large international meeting, we were already talking to the large dental manufacturers, the 3Ms, the GSKs of the world, not some of them under NDA and some of them not, and some of them just what we had publicly, to show them this is what we were doing, would you be interested? Our tact was if we gathered enough of them together, one of them would step forward and either become an acquisition down the road or step forward, and what's happened to us thankfully is that 3M is a co-marketing partner with us. So before we walked into the Canadian healthcare scene or Canadian dental care scene, we have 3M on our side saying if you want to do any preventive program, you need to have the canary. Which is, when we went out to speak to our distribution people, we said, you know, you have 150, or you have a lot of devices out in the marketplace. Why do you think 3M landed on the canary's doorstep? Because it took us 4 or 5 years of educating the 3M team as to the value of what we were doing. Here's our R&D, a lot of it done under confidentiality agreements, and they weren't the only team they weren't the only company that was looking at us as well too. So with that validation, it became easier to say to shareholders or to investors, you know, we're talking to 3M or we're talking to GSK. And when it came down to it, we could then choose which one would be a good co-marketing partner. They didn't become a distribution vehicle, but for example, we were just at a dental meeting a couple of weeks ago, and when you walked into the meeting, there was a Canary booth or Quantum booth. You'd see us at the 3M booth talking about remineralization and our prevention, and our distributor had us as their booth as well too. So we were at 3 different places. The manufacturer was the most difficult one to bring to the table. They needed a lot more education. The distributor was interested in, does it work? How much money can I make? The other manufacturing partners that looked at us, the other large dental companies that look at us and still look at us, said, show us your R&D, how does it work, how will it fit with my own product base, you're a one-product company, can you fit in? And it becomes a longer-term process as to where we go with them. And 3M has been wonderful to work with, and they're very supportive here in the Canadian and eventually in the US market. So it's a different way of attracting money.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the healthcare space. So I know it's a challenging space to be an entrepreneur. Personally, I think it's a very exciting time to be a healthcare startup company just because there's so many opportunities. I'm a little biased. I'm a healthcare advisor here at Mars. So what do you think, so you obviously already made a decision to play. You didn't open a bakery, you didn't start a iPhone app company. What do you think is attractive about the healthcare space now and sort of for the next 5 years kind of horizon?
From my perspective, it's just the sheer need. Healthcare has been an area that has been under-entrepreneured, if you will, or under-innovated. I'd say in many ways it is very much hospital-centric, doctor-centric. If we can treat it with drugs or cut it out quick, we're okay. Chronic conditions we're miserable at, and as I call it, we have a sick care system in place. It's pretty much effective when symptoms show up. We are miserable at prevention. We have no systemic structure for it at all. So I would say what intrigues me is just the sheer opportunity and the sheer need. I mean, when you consider that nearly 50 cents of the dollars spent by the Ontario government in this province are toward healthcare, but yet think of all the challenges that system has, there's a tipping point. And you can kind of see it in every budget minister's face, and you can see it in the federal budget that's going to be released tomorrow. There's this fear in this sense. You've got an aging population, you've got personalized medicine coming forward, you've got costs that are going to rise, but yet the budgets are just at their tipping point now. So where is it going to break? And it's going to break through innovation and disruption. And so when you consider that most healthcare services are analog today, most are bricks and mortar, the revolution of Health 2.0 hasn't really hit Canada in any way. The genetic revolution hasn't hit Canada in any way. The opportunities are profound and they're so necessary. So yeah, if you can see me getting excited, it's because I am. That's what really intrigues me, and I think when you look at the next 5 years in health, it's going to be about how can you move away from reactive medicine toward proactive medicine? How can you move away from physical face-to-face interaction toward virtual? How can you leverage wireless remote tools and EMR, EHR alongside wellness platforms to make individuals much more accountable and people-centered health as opposed to victims of what the doctors or what's happening to them. There's going to be a giant turn. It has to happen, and that's what really excites me of being in it.
Jessica, you mentioned that early on you had a lot of kind of dialogues with participants in healthcare before you convinced yourself that it's indeed the business you want to be in. What else do you see? And you obviously made a decision to proceed. So how do you see the opportunity in the industry?
Well, I really believe that healthcare, for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned, will be moving closer and closer to patients themselves. I think people are becoming a lot more aware and educated themselves on what their own health situation is, and they want to know those things. So I see that being a really big opportunity, not just for our company, but for innovators in general. And what excites me is, first of all, that I like the healthcare space in general because you can make a difference to people. It's their health, it's their life. How people function is very essential to their well-being. But the second thing that excites me is more from a design point of view, is that if healthcare moves closer to patients, then whatever technology that is needs to be usable for people. Right now, I see that there's a lot of technologies which are really fantastic, but they're implemented in ways that are functional for a doctor or a clinician, but not necessarily for the patient. I think cervical cancer screening or the Pap test is a really good example. It's really easy for the doctor, but it's horrible for the woman. And so people ended up not going. But if you can create better designed solutions that understand users, then I think that's a really big opportunity for capitalizing on that opportunity.
Interesting. I find it actually quite fascinating that the companies highlighted here, they really embody what's in healthcare language is patient-centric healthcare. I mean, there's a lot of talk about it, but I'm really pleased to see companies here actually doing it. How do you see opportunities, Stephen?
I'm going to disagree with everybody.
Okay, go ahead.
The reason, and this may be just dental, but the other half of my volunteer half is dealing with 2 levels of government on looking at designing dental programs for high-risk population. And I find that my profession is more innovative than government is. And this morning started with a sit-down with the Social Assistance Review Commission to talk about how to make programs that are preventive-based, that deal with not the elements of the canary system, but the elements of the value of prevention, the value of early detection, even the development of how do you screen and how do you quantify that screen, and can we have good data. So it may be a dental issue, but here in Ontario, what I've been saying for a long time is that government is very far behind in understanding the value of early prevention. They're very far behind in understanding the needs of the population in some of the ministries. Some of them are much further ahead. And that for our company, the people that will embrace the technology first will be private practice. The people that will embrace the technology last will be public health. And so that may be different in the other areas, but unfortunately, that's just the reality. And one part of that reality is that the fiscal strains that we're under, and they're very high, means that innovation, at least through MOH, is going to be extremely difficult over the next number of years. And I deal with this, again, on my, when I sit down as a representative of the Ontario Dental Association, we meet with the various ministries, including, with Finance Department, which we met with before the budget meeting, and they're very clear. They're not spending a dollar. If you're showing them something that's going to ramp up costs, they say, I'll talk to you if you do this. Not flat, I want this. And that's been the message for the last 2 years. So if you're bringing in new technology that has an upfront cost to them, they may not be interested. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't bring it in. It may mean that bringing it in means engaging practitioners to deliver it, but not depending upon the healthcare system to do it. I know that's very...
Oh, no. In fact, we agree. If there's
Yes.
anyone here who's under the illusion that disruptive innovation is going to come through the government at any level in this country, go somewhere else and do something else. Disruptive innovation never comes from the government, will not come from large industries. Most of the time, disruption comes from the person in their basement or in their garage. The Jobs, the Googles of the world did not start through the government, and I would agree wholesale with you that this is not going to be a solution solved by the MOH, as much respect as I have for them. It's going to start from innovators who are looking for new ways to engage individuals and groundswells and grassroots movements as opposed to top-down thinking.
And the other thing that you have to realize too, depending upon the technology that you have, you may be preaching something that's very different than what the provider is looking at. I mean, I made the joke about drill, fill, and bill, but in my profession, that's the approach to dealing with a very common disease. And using the words disease and tooth decay is really a leap to start with. So when we go out to talk about it, and it's not just myself, others who work with us or who are lecturing, we talk about disease now, which wasn't the way I was trained 31 years ago. I was a drill, fill, and bill guy and scrape off some tartar, and that was the end of the day. There was no diseases. Now there are diseases, and we treat diseases. So there's a real shift that you have to get the provider community on board. And it's very difficult because they're stuck in that old model, and our old model is drill, fill, and bill. If I can't drill, fill, and bill, what's this remineralization? I don't want to do prevention. Let somebody else do it.
Well, I think in every system there is a group of, let's call them change makers, people who are practicing in the profession and understand the insides of the healthcare delivery operations, but they also see the need for change, and you kind of need to find those change makers to become your champions within the system. I'd like to open it to the audience for questions. There are microphones. Please come up.
I commend all three of you for the work that you do. My question is to Jessica. I know the calendar says 2012, but of all the elements of healthcare that have as much hysteria and disinformation as well as medical breakthroughs is women's reproductive health. And it's even become political, especially if you're a Republican in the US, or even religious in some parts of the world. It's two parts. As an entrepreneur getting into this field, what are the unique challenges you have found getting in there, into this field, and dealing with this topic, and especially as a woman?
I think there are different types of women in different cultural, economic scenarios. I think there are definitely women who are uncomfortable with cervical cancer screening. There are women who are totally happy going for a Pap test. And so I think it's really about finding the segment of the market that you need to target who believe in what you're doing and who will adopt what it is that you're trying to provide for them. I'm not trying to force anyone to change something that they don't believe in. I'm just trying to help people who don't have access or are uncomfortable with the current scenario and provide them with a better solution.
Yes. about dental remineralization, you call it, but more minerals as a counteractive. Number one, if that can happen to a tooth, possibly it can happen to the bones too. There is possibly other alternative for bone deterioration, right? Instead of your bones falling apart, possibly there is something that we can do to make it better. If we can do it with a tooth, for sure we can do it for the whole system. And also natural medicine or alternative medicine. Like for years, I used to attend every year in Toronto, the conference. They talk about these conversations. This has been common for the last, I think, 15, 20 years. The alternative medicine is very much along the same lines that you're talking about. So I wonder if you, the dentist, and yourself have been in touch with that community, because they're all, the doctors that are there are just talking the same language that you're talking. So the innovation that is already here is already happening, and may not be happening in Toronto or in Canada, but they go down south to countries that their policies are much easier to deal with. Costa Rica, Dominican Republic, Mexico, just because doctors are able to do what they cannot do here. So by far, we know that people who are sick, we know, you can treat yourself with alternative medicine, which is the best, but it's going to cost you, or you can go with the traditional medicine, and you may die. But this is a very well-known topic discussed.
So clearly, alternative medicine exists everywhere, and I think what separates is evidence, right? So the device that Quantum Dental is developing, is going through FDA approval, maybe received already.
No, we have our Health Canada EU approval, but I mean, in terms of alternative medicine, what we look to do is to approach it in a much more rigorous fashion. And it's not just our device, but the community, the research communities that we move in are looking at, can we take enamel, which is not encased inside the body, and actually get the surface to recrystallize overnight? And how do you then monitor it? So this has been a challenge that's been going on in the research community for years and years and years, and we've stepped in with a device to detect and monitor it. But we also understand the other products that are on market that allow that to happen. Some of them are natural. A lot of them that we work with are here and available in Canada now. There are a variety of toothpastes and other such things that are used or dispensed in practice. Our approach has been not to head off in the natural market, but to look at the products, look at the R&D that's being done, and to make sure that they're making sound claims based upon sound research and using sound research models. And there are a series of models that you can use to prove both in the lab and now eventually in humans that these things do work. And we provide the in-human part as well too. I hope that answers your question.
Please.
Hi. Two things. One, I not long ago turned 50, and all those really not enjoyable tests that you have to go through? I so applaud you, Celine, for coming up with the swab, because there are awful tests, colonoscopy. I know it may be TMI, but if you haven't gone through it, you or your parents will go through it. There are horrible, horrible tests. I hope the technology changes by the time I have to go through another one. I'm thrilled that you're doing something with dental caries, because I'm a child of the 60s. I was born in 58, and they used the horrible, frightening, big, long metal needles back then. You can't tell anybody it doesn't hurt. It hurts. If you could come up with an alternative to that, building a path, if you build a better mousetrap, I would be at your doorstep, because it's frightening. But to all of you, fear, pain, aging, and illness, to me, seem like natural drivers to help move forward what it is each one of you is doing. So to do that, though, you would have to, as you say, educate. Our healthcare system needs help. There are people who are doing good work but need to learn a lot more. Do you actually work with them to teach them even basic stuff? Like we've seen the big campaign about washing hands to help prevent flu and cold. There are very basic things that don't cost anything or don't cost very much that can be taught so that people can take a more proactive role, I guess, in their own healthcare. Are you doing enough educating of people in the system so that they learn to teach others? And the reason I asked that is a few years ago, I bumped into a former U.S. Surgeon General who happened to be from Puerto Rico, where I'm from, in a JCPenney of all places. And I talked to her about an idea about starting a nonprofit organization that promotes preventive health care, because I don't see enough of it being done at government level. So there you go. Thank you.
Well, so let's just be clear. All people here are running for-profit companies. And so, as one of people like that, basically you have a plan and you sort of implementing your plan, you're measured on revenues, and, normal business metrics. So, as one of the entrepreneurs, I would say educating the healthcare system to what Stephen was talking about. You need to have champions, and sometimes the business models have to shift somewhat to make room for this breakthrough innovative product. So that's where education comes in. Any comments?
Well, I'm just from a Utopia's perspective, one of our channels of distribution is through physicians and through allied health professionals. So in fact, we spend an awful lot of time. We have something called Utopia University, which is a site directly to educate health professionals and the system about what we're doing, why it's different, and how they can become involved, and in fact how there's a revenue stream for them to be involved. So it's not just altruistic help, but it's something that can help their practice as well.
Anything to it?
I think for us, we recognize that screening is a process and not just one point at which a sample is collected, that women need to understand why they need to screen in the first place. They have to understand how they're supposed to collect their sample, what happens after they collect their sample, how do they interpret their results. And I am fully aware of that process. Because we're a small company right now, we're focused specifically on the sample collection, because that's what I believe is sort of the biggest pain point, but it is part of our company philosophy to try to educate women as much as we can, to have as many contact points with them as we can. And it's not just the women as well, it's the doctors too, because doctors are not always aware of the technologies that are available. We're not a cytology test, we're a DNA test. And so doctors may not be aware that this is even an option that's available. And so it is part of what we do to go out and tell them that this is available, and to direct them to some of the research that's happening. It's important for us to meet those researchers, to see what they're doing so that we can communicate to other people as clearly as possible as well.
Just a couple of quick questions about my question is mostly for Stefan and Jessica, actually. If you could talk a little bit about the regulatory barriers that you may have experienced in the health profession, in accessing the market that you want to access. The College of Physicians, the Royal College of Dentistry, these are highly regulatory places, and I'm wondering just how did you get past some of the regulatory aspect to actually get your product be championed, and then to even connect to the distribution system, specifically maybe to Jessica, if you talk about this, the distribution. Because I think last year, from the time that you start your company, I'm curious to know if you've picked up a lot of traction, a lot of customers from that time till now, for example, and just how you've moved through that regulatory hump to get to your distribution system. If you could talk about that, that'd be good.
Sure. Well, to be totally honest, it took a lot longer than I thought it was going to. There were a lot of challenges that I did not expect. So the regulatory systems for medical devices is a little bit different in Canada, the US, and in Europe. So it took a little bit of digging and doing our own homework to understand where is what is the path of least resistance for our product. And so we found that although in Canada and the US we'd be a Class 2 device, we may actually be a Class 1 device in Europe. And so we decided to sort of attack Europe first, and largely because of the regulatory environment there. But a benefit of Europe just happened to be that Europe seems to be pretty open to adopting new technologies. There's a lot of research going on in Europe right now on HPV testing as primary screening over the Pap test. And so we've been able to connect with those researchers, and they are the ones that are championing HPV testing. So we're able to ride off their coattails a little bit. In terms of the distribution, I think I would say this has been the biggest challenge for our company is really trying to understand what is the best place for us to start. We originally thought that we were able to sell through clinics, but it really depends on the jurisdiction. Sometimes doctors get paid a lot to do Pap tests and they don't want to change. And so there's no point in trying to convince those people. It's really trying to figure out where, again, is the path of least resistance.
So finding those white spaces.
Exactly, yeah. You know, where there are a lot of researchers who are, you know, doing that thing where the government seem to be more open to new technologies, that type of thing.
Just to answer in terms of, you know, where does the Royal College of Physicians or the Royal College of Dental Surgeons fit in? You're looking at a regulatory body that regulates the physician, doesn't regulate the device. The device is regulated through the FDA, through Health Canada, and through, you know, EU. You're looking at then what we call scopes here in Canada. We deal with it as a scope of practice. So does that fall within my scope of practice? Does it fall within the scope of practice of a dental hygienist? And the college will not endorse a particular technology. But you have to be careful about the claims you make about the technologies that are currently on the market. So, you know, having somebody, if you're, you know, developing a device, having somebody on your advisory board who is an end user, who understands not just their own little clinical practice, but the broader realm, because you have both the regulatory bodies and then you have the professional bodies. The professional bodies may be the ones that can help you move it forward. They may be able to add the billing codes if they so desire.
Right.
Or they may temper you if you decide to do a push-pull type of approach to it, which we've seen happen in dentistry. So we're very careful about modeling what we're going to do before we do it. And there have been a number of other technologies that have preceded us in different areas, and we say, okay, well, this didn't work because they were dragging the profession along and the profession was not interested. So how do we bring the profession with us before we introduce this technology?
Great, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, very good question, please.
When I think about marketing and sales in healthcare, I sort of get that feeling. You're all in very different healthcare spaces. How do you think about marketing?
You should have that feeling, by the way. That's a good feeling to have, because what we didn't cover today, and I'm really glad you asked the question, is oftentimes there's this perception that the entrepreneurial job is over once you've finished creating your product and it's the field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. It doesn't work that way, and actually having a really good sense and a defined picture of how you're going to sell it and market it and the dollars that it's going to take to do that has probably been one of the biggest learning lessons that I've had over 12 years doing this now. So depending on, I think that marketing answer really depends on who your end user is, and if you're going direct to consumer or if you're going sort of B2B or B2C, makes a very big difference. But I can certainly say in Utopia right now, it's very much a branding exercise, and it's a B2C business opportunity. And so thinking through not only creating your product and making sure it works and it's validated, but then thinking through the brand implications and what it's going to take to spend the dollars to market that and break through and differentiate. I have that feeling in my stomach when you ask that question, because it's a constant challenge day to day that you've got to undertake if you're going to do something that way.
I come at it in a much more, in a more practical sense, which is we're on market now. So what are my sales force saying about, what are my sales force telling me that the end user is saying about our product? And what are my install sites? My first number of install sites are my cherished ones. There are some of our guys who were on our advisory committee who helped us put together various parts of the product, various parts of the software interface. So what are they telling us about it? What do they hate about it? That's what I want to hear. A lot of them go, oh, no, I really love it. Well, no. I really want to know what you hate about it. What are your challenges? And that then allows us to go back and have an open discussion in the company. And the last one we had was in January. It was amazing, where we spent, I think over Christmas holidays, I fired out something to our team and said, what are the barriers to market adoption? There was this whole flood of emails back and forth. Well, I find this, I find that. And it culminated in a half day where we sat down and said, well, here are the barriers. What are the tools? These are the tools we currently have. What new tools do we need in order to address the barriers that we've seen? And now we'll go back again to look at it, whether it's been good. And the other thing that we've done is we've looked at our sales force, and for our company, it wasn't really the sales force we wanted, so we've changed it. So we've made the difficult decision to say that the sales reps that we had didn't buy it, didn't really deliver the message, didn't understand the message to deliver, and so they've been replaced. And we're now out with new sales force, because this is really key for our company. So that's also a difficult decision to make. You know, the hires that you have, are they going to give you what you want? And if they're not working, if they're not delivering, you have to get the right people on the bus. And once you find the right people on the bus, then you're ready to go.
Thank you. Good question, please.
I wanted to ask the panelists how they approach the issue of getting into the heads of the consumers, beginning to understand how people actually would think about their product. And it's great to do the statistical analysis, and you can do all the sort of the counting of bodies and all the rest of that stuff. But if people really don't think about your product the way you think about it, they're not going to buy it. And I wondered if they could comment on how they made that trade-off between investing in understanding consumers and the way they thought, and investing in product development and other aspects of the business.
I mean, I'll take a first crack at that, because it's an excellent question, and I say the simple answer is ask them and listen, and so it doesn't have to be fancy market research, albeit it's often tempting, and boy, you can spend a lot very quickly on it. But you know, as the entrepreneur, as the founder, you pretty much want to run the show at the beginning, or the way I do, as a mom and pop store, where you have a direct line to your customers and are speaking with them. So whether you want to call it a focus group or you want to call it a phone call, where it's, how are things going? Do you like it? Don't you? And you're constantly doing that, and you want to embody that same sense in your team. So your frontline customer service or your service providers, you're always getting that feedback loop. But I would say, whether you go toward the extent of doing formal market research or leveraging great market research that Mars could help you with, I would say the simplest way is just ask, and always constantly ask. And there are great tools like SurveyMonkey, where literally in 15 minutes you can create a wonderful looking survey. It will do all the work for you. You don't need a statistician or a market research expert, and you can get great answers, and then you can iterate that. So as you make changes to your product, which you inevitably always will be doing, then 3 months later, 2 months later, 2 weeks later, send out another survey, as long as you don't abuse your clients too much. They'll be happy to answer you.
Actually, building on Jeff's comment, the internet is an amazing tool to get into consumers' mindset. And there's so many sort of disease groups and user groups around particular medical condition. So those are people who are already proactive and loud about what they're thinking. And I think there are lots of opportunities to work with this group. You need to recognize their biases also, because they're kind of self-selected to be there. But as a starting point, I think it's a good place to start.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I think talking to people is the best way to understand them. But I'd also like to add, for myself, I do use the internet to talk to people, but I prefer to do it in person, because I find that sometimes people don't always express what they're feeling. So especially because we're developing a physical product, you really need to watch them when they're playing with the product, when they're giving you feedback, because you might say, does this feel intuitive to you? On the internet, they might just write yes, but when you're there with them in person, they might hesitate a little bit, they might think about it, and so you know that there's something going on in their mind. It's not an immediate response. So then you have to go back, and you can't just talk to one person, you have to talk to several people, because there start to be trends that come out. So if everybody is doing that, you have to think to yourself, okay, what is it about this that's making them hesitant? And then you have to dig into that deeper. So you have to go back and talk to them and say, I know you said yes, but there was obviously something there that you didn't really feel comfortable about. Can you tell me about that? And sometimes they don't even realize that they did that. It's only because you observe them that they would even think about it. So yeah, for us, it's really important to talk to them.
We use, one of the ways we reach our customers are dentists, dental hygienists. So dental conventions are a good place to speak to them. So as we would roll out, we would go to a convention, take a booth, and there are tricks we use to drive traffic, and then we'd survey and look at the surveys at the end of it. And the surveys were very much to what are you using, what's your price point, why would you like it, why would you hate it? And then go back and evaluate it. So we were looking to see their understanding of what was on the market now and what was the price point that they would feel comfortable at in terms of purchasing it, and that helped us going forward. And we used the same survey with slight iterations on it every one of the conventions we went to until we got our Health Canada approval. So that allowed us to look at an international convention. We did some stuff in the US, so that was part of our market education, but also education for us as well too.
And I also want to add the last question about the marketing. I think that speaking to your stakeholders really helps with the marketing down the line, because if they're involved in the product development and you speak to them all the way through, you understand what concerns they have already. So by the time you get to the point where you start marketing to people like them, you already understand how to deal with their questions, what kind of concerns they would have, and also you would understand what kind of data you need to collect in order to answer those questions.
May I ask two things?
Sure.
Thank you. Question to our dental entrepreneur, first of all.
Okay.
Thank you for everyone for coming. You talked about earlier, just a general business thing, you talk about winning over 3M, and you use education to get the interest and investors and partners. Can you tell us maybe one or two ways that are best to educate prospective investors or partners?
Our focus was always to gather up and do the research. And as we move, so we had the research as it moved forward, papers were published, and early on I attended or became a member of the tooth decay research group, and it's a small group of about 400 people just looking at fluorides and tooth decay and detection. So I went to all the meetings and made sure that I got to meet, because at the meetings were both researchers but also the major manufacturers were there looking for new ideas. And so I was a little bit forward, and I met the people I needed to meet and pushed us in to say, we're new technology, we demand or we need to be positioned at whatever the forum was. I remember making a push to Indiana University's Early Caries Detection Conference saying, we have to come down because we're new, we need to talk. And somewhere along the way we found a champion and said, sure, come down, here's 25 minutes, come show your slide deck. We were just showing them R&D data, and that was my entree in. So every time there was a meeting that was in our space, that's where we went. And every time there was a new development, we would send a blast out to people that we knew. And if I didn't know them, I knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. So we networked to make sure that we had the right people there. And sometimes they'd say, I want to come up and see you. And we would then construct the visit, make sure we had our NDA, always make sure we had our NDAs in place. And then we also knew which companies we could show stuff to and which companies we wouldn't show stuff to. And there was always a piece that we held back that would make it much more difficult for them to commercialize. So there are pieces that each company would see and some wouldn't see all that they wanted to. And we're also very careful now about who purchases, because we want to make sure that when you purchase, you're not going to disassemble us and figure out what we're doing.
Next thing is not really a question, but maybe more of a challenge to anyone that's in healthcare innovation. I know personally, I would love to see if someone can just please save me from having to take a blood test from a needle. Is anyone working on that? I would be your new best friend. Baby needle?
Maybe you can do it.
Okay, so that's just the other thing. If there's anyone, please believe me.
Right,
There are
we'll
people
take
that
it
are
on.
begging for it.
Spectral scan, magnetic resonance spectral scan, non-basally tell you where blood levels are.
You had a question, please?
Yes. Clearly, this is really impressive in terms of the innovation. My question really was geared towards understanding the regulatory aspect of things in terms of validating the device. That's really hit critical mass and is doing well. And also continuous innovation. Since the device is going through iterative improvements, how do you sustain a parallel path to validating and keeping up regulatory standards with the innovation? So on one side, you have the regulatory aspects, so you have to validate your device. And on the other side, there's iterative improvements to the existing device and continuous innovation. So how do you address?
Well, I guess, if we had the panelists of, Medtronic, and, that would have been a great question. I think everyone here is on their first, product, really.
We're working on stuff now.
Yeah.
So in the company, actually, the person that's responsible for regulatory is with us today. So we have somebody in-house who's responsible for doing our regulatory, and I'm a regulatory consultant. So we have our product, but we're also looking at the applications for that product. So we have actually in our clinical practice, we have somebody who's responsible for constructing a series of studies. So we'll get a question from the field, and the one that we've solved is, can you find tooth decay beneath a sealant, which wasn't something we envisioned back in August. And so easily constructed a small clinical study. We had validation using the actually University of Texas we work with, and we now have, we'll be announcing in June or publishing in June, results saying that we can do that, or finding decay around a filling. So we're
But it's
always
the same device, right?
It's the same device. All we're doing is saying, okay, here's what our path is, even though it's on market now, how can we expand our group of claims? So that's one part of the company. There's still a more base part of our R&D that's going on, which is looking at a next gen for a much broader imaging approach to it. And then there's the other part of the company, which is saying, well, here's our software and hardware. Can we improve that? So there are two folks that are responsible for the day-to-day running of that, but also in terms of looking at innovation in those areas or improvement. And then with our quality systems in place, we're constantly dealing with our manufacturer, both our hardware and our software, who's here today, to look at how to improve and how to go out. We have another software update that's coming out in about 2.5 weeks. So we're always innovating. It always fits within our regulatory piece, and if it doesn't, we step back and say, okay, well, what do we have to do to make it fit? But you can't be static. You really can't be static. As soon as we came on market, the first thing we said is, well, how to expand our claims? And off we went on a the sales and marketing was here, and here we are off expanding our claims. And we're still looking at that now. So that's always been part of our strategic plan.
Is it the same for you, Jeff?
Yeah, 100%. We don't deal in the same, we do have a product line, so we deal with the Health Canada and the Natural Health Product Directorate, but we've genetically tailored the first line of natural health products ever. We're the only company that take your genes and create a personalized formula based on genetics for you. And we're constantly evolving that within, as Stephen said, within the regulatory framework, but the minute you stop innovating is the minute someone's going to overtake you. And so I'd say I would hate for anyone to look at the regulatory environment as a block or a barrier to stop innovating. In fact, you just have to make sure that if you need to pause or you need to hire great consultants to figure out how to work within it, great. But you need someone, whether it's the founder or someone within the team, who's constantly innovating and saying, okay, what we've just developed, how do I make it redundant in the next year?
I think it's just something that's required. I mean, the V&V part of it is It's certainly there. It's sometimes you learn something from the validation process in the next iteration of the product, and often that's because that's a step prior to actually going to customer clinical trials. But I guess there's a bit of a trade-off between the actual innovation, because like you just mentioned, sometimes you have to take a step back and look at the whole cycle and innovate in specific stages. Now more face carrier.
But I think it's easier to make choices when you're interacting with the customers, and you can really decide, where you want to spend your resources in terms of, new applications.
I think that you do have to make a decision at some point, though, because, for example, the danger for us is we talk to people all the time, and everybody always says that this would be great, this would be great, this would be great, this would be great. So you really have to plan it out. You have to lay out for yourself what is the fundamental thing that your device needs to do, and then just
which is good enough.
Which is good enough, yeah, and just do that, and everything else that comes with it, that becomes second generation, third generation, things that you can work on. But you can't stall your product because you're always trying to perfect it. So you have to sort of balance it.
I guess you can also validate the difference. So what you're innovating is baseline, and then what you're changing or modifying, you validate the difference, and so you get the regulatory.
Yeah.
Good way to think about it. Please.
As somebody who's been on the Cleveland Clinic website and has paid out about 40% of his after-tax income for root canal work this winter, I'm quite interested in both of what you heard. And what that led me to is that in Canada, from a corporate and from a personal point of view, an awful lot of our healthcare decisions are defined by benefits and what is going to be paid. So I was wondering if you could build off of your discussion around educating your stakeholders. Do you start very early looking at the actual insurance company role in all of this, because so many people, the end users, have to look at what they're going to get back out of benefits and that? Have you started that process, and how? I would assume, and I should never assume anything, that it would be quite a frustrating role and a challenging one. So I was wondering if you could talk about the role of insurance companies that would be compensating for the payment actually for your services.
Well, what's interesting is another facet of what I did is in the years I worked with the Dental Association, we sat on what was called the Employer Relations Task Force. So the first thing that you have to understand is that insurance companies don't decide upon coverage, employers do, which means employees tell employers that this is a good thing to do. So in terms of our education process as to how we headed out, we felt that the most important thing that we could do as a company was to begin to educate the end user, the dentist, about this whole concept of prevention and remineralization. And so that started with our company back in 2003, 2004. The problem is that there's never enough hours in the day to educate. But there have been a series of articles, and then we used the Ontario Dental Association to help us get the message out, because it was the right time for them to push prevention too. In terms of the insurers, we speak to the insurance industry, and they're interested in, will it save me money? They're also interested in, are the employers interested in it? So that we know that we'll go back to them when we have a larger install base, and we can talk to them about the value of prevention. Right now, what we see is that the end users and the patients will request it, and down the road, the insurers will come in. They typically are last resort. The other piece is the billing codes. Do they exist? And the billing codes exist for some of the therapies. For the diagnostics, it's more of a sea change, because the profession itself is mired in the idea that radiographs and visual exam is the way to go. So we have to educate them that there are other ways of examining that particular tooth surface, and then pushing for the billing code. And we're working at that as we speak. We have our install base. We were careful to select our install base to make sure that they were, people of influence. And we can see that down the road we'll get the billing code in for the scan, but it's going to take us time. So right now, when we go out to show dentists how to use it, we show them the ROI using a number of different ways in their practice, from both the remin, what it will bring into the remineralization therapies will bring into your practice, the diagnosis of lesions that can be treated early on, and also those new patients that come to your practice too, because patients are attracted to new technology, especially stuff that's non-invasive, safe, and avoids x-rays.
Any comments on this? So the importance of revenue model early on, and sort of who pays for all those interesting things we could develop?
Certainly, certainly one of the lessons that I've come to see, there's a very bright line between those services that are medically necessary and therefore either covered by provincial insurance or some kind of benefit coverage, and then those that are not medically necessary and would be traditionally covered by privately. And knowing which side of that you're on in terms of the products and services that you're offering is an absolutely critical thing, because having come from the Cleveland Clinic prior to Utopia and having been standing on one side of medically necessary and the other side of doing cancer screening, where I was doing diagnostics and then offering preventive therapy, some for pay, some government paid, just understanding that line is really important. And just my only brief comment is on insurance. Utopia's approach to insurance is very important to get them on side, but we're really embarking on just putting together a really great data set and an outcome that you can take with you. It's all nice to say I've got a great idea and boy, Great West Life or Sun Life, you should listen to me. But unless you've got an awful good set of data and a compelling reason why it's going to save them and their employers money, the chance of getting that meeting is not going to happen.
I was going to share a story with you. Many years ago in dentistry, a new product came to market that was a chlorhexidine-based varnish. And we always like to model to see how things went. And in this instance, this company went out and got Canada Life on board. Canada Life doesn't exist anymore. And Canada Life put this into its dental program because they were told it was going to save them money. And that's what they pitched to the patients and to the insurer. The marketing they came to the profession was, you'll make money. So at that point in time, I was on this employer relations task force, and it was at difficult economic times, and Mercer's had gathered all the big employer groups together, and they came visiting the associations to try and barrel down our fees. And I remember sitting in a room with Stelco, DeFasco, and guys from the TD Bank, and they had 3 questions they wanted to ask us. And third on the list was this new product. They said, what do you think? And at that point in time, I wasn't Quantum. This was early on in my career. And we said the Dental Association does not endorse product provincially. And they said, okay, but what do you think? I said, well, here's the ad in our local journal. We'll make money. What did they tell you? They said, we'll save money. I said, well, we're finished. So, you have to be very careful. And this particular company really ran into troubles, both with their FDA approval, they were early on, and also about the fact that they weren't clear in their marketing. Yeah. Somebody makes, somebody saves, and in the end, Canada Life, the company went under, Canada Life got stung big time. And
last question. Yeah. Sorry.
No, go on, I'm sorry.
To compensate for my standing, I ask just 2 questions, if I may. At what stage of your entrepreneurship journey did you decide to focus on your business idea full time, and what made you, focus on it full time? And also, having completed a section of your journey, in retrospective, looking back, what is one thing you would do differently if you had to start from the beginning again? Thank you.
30 seconds for everyone to,
Sure.
Yeah.
So full-time was right from the beginning for me. I'm the type of person, and many entrepreneurs are, that you're laser-like focus and all in. It's very difficult to chase 2 rabbits at the same time. So for me, it was right away. And doing things different in this venture, I would think just considering when to bring on venture capital and the kind of funding that you're looking for. There's a very big difference between the expectations of friends and family, angel investors, institutional investors, especially venture capitalists, and getting some advice and taking some wisdom on when is the right time to attract those levels of financing based on expectations and what you're going to have to deliver is something I'd probably do differently.
Jessica?
I was full-time right from the beginning as well, except at the beginning I had 2 part-time jobs to support my rent until I got to the point where we were able to get a grant to support myself as well, at which point I quit my 2 part-time jobs and then I was just full-time. In terms of what I would do differently, I think I would ask more questions more often. I think there's a wealth of knowledge out there. You alone as an entrepreneur, it's impossible for you to know all the things that you need to know. You just need to go out there and ask as many questions as you can.
Steven?
I'm doing 2 jobs, but they're all very related. So I'm still a clinician, still love it, and I'm still running Quantum. What would I have done differently? Once you make a decision that your funding is not right for you, get out. We waited too long. Once you feel that you don't have the right team on the bus, get rid of the team that's not working properly and move forward. Those are very difficult decisions to make. And when you look back in retrospect, you should have done them sooner. But those are really the things that, the rest of it, no, the path has always been clear as to where we're going.
Thank you. Very good question. I'd like to thank our panelists. And I think the messages are very clear. Talk often, talk to your customers, make decisions. That's what I heard. Thank you very much.